All right, welcome to Weekly Talkback. My name's Kevin Beers,
And I'm David Witten.
and this is the show where we get to talk back to Pastor Dave about his message from the previous Sunday. This week was January 28th, 2024, and the name of the message was A Touch of from the Master's Hand. So, jumping straight into it, I was curious why you went in the direction that you went. I mean, I know you used the uh,
Narrative.
narrative lectionary,
Mhm.
but what brought you to tell the stories that you told?
Well, I think the story that's found there in the gospel of Jairus's daughter, and then the woman who was wanting to touch the um, the robe of Jesus. It's a fascinating story, and I have in previous times I have preached one or the other. But this time I decided to go ahead and preach it kind of intertwined, and that was a bit of a challenge for me. Um, but certainly the story of Jairus's daughter dying, or actually having died and then coming back to life, Jesus bringing her back to life. It just strongly reminded me of that incident that I share in the sermon concerning the missionary couple's daughter who died on the way to the hospital, and the urgency. I mean, I think that was what really brought it together for me. I sense Jairus's urgency to go find Jesus, hating to leave his daughter's bedside, and yet feeling, like he got to do something or she's going to die. And the same urgency I can just imagine in the missionary couple as they're driving from, 6 hours or 8 hours away, trying to get to the hospital in time to save their daughter.
Okay, when you told that story, what flashback for me was one of my daughters had fallen, hit her head. She's laying on the floor unconscious, bleeding,
Wow.
and I'm the only one home, and we had a dog, and the dog wants to get to the blood, things like that. And I had to leave her to get a phone to call an ambulance. Now, that's only minutes. And it was like an excruciating long period of time trying to make a phone call.
Hmm.
It was just, and I mean, I can't imagine driving 6, 8 hours to
Yeah.
get help
Yeah.
and and knowing that your daughter could die along the way. Like I,
Yeah.
I wasn't even concerned about her. Well, I was concerned about her dying, but like, how do you get help? And then the front door's locked, so I got to let the ambulance workers in,
Hmm.
or the paramedics. I got to let them in, so I have to leave her on the floor and go let them in. And there's so much internal conflict.
Yeah.
And when you were telling that story, that my story was flashing through my head,
Yeah.
and yeah, like there's the urgency, and yet you have to do what you have to do.
That's right. That's right. There are things that you have to do. So to me, I mean, I think it's one of the only stories that I can think of in the Gospels surrounding Jesus that is so intertwined, and both are such powerful stories that they both need to be told, but you don't want to lessen the other by telling the other one. You don't want to lessen one by telling the other, and yet somehow as I saw it this week. Um, they really fit well within each other, and the stories both talk about the healing, life-giving power that Jesus had then and has now.
Hmm. And so after telling those stories, then you shifted the entire message shifted to you said, "Don't ask me why these things happen."
Uh-huh.
And then you went back to the Swiss family that after their daughter died, then she was welcomed into heaven with Jesus, which was that for me that was a very emotional piece there. But the fact that you took us from this life here and the things we go through here to what happens in the next life. What was your thinking in making that shift?
Well, I mean, I think the fact of the matter is, in that lesson, Jesus brings back Jairus's little daughter from death. Um, Now, how do we deal with those who have already died? Like, for instance, the missionaries' uh, little girl. And to me, eternity, immortality is what Jesus gives us in his life, death, resurrection. I mean, if it wasn't through Jesus's resurrection, in my opinion, we don't have eternal life. And so through that, we do have eternal life. So add that to the end of the story, because the story doesn't end with the poor little girl being buried in Jos, Nigeria, and the missionary couple going back home. That isn't the end of the story. The end of the story, to me, and this is how I played a little bit with it, because I wasn't there, but the whole Aramaic a phrase that Jesus uses to raise Jairus's daughter, I just kind of incorporated into the idea that that poor little girl who died on the way to the hospital, unbeknownst to her parents, she heard the whisper and heard Jesus's voice say, "Talitha cum," little girl, rise up. And she opened her eyes, and there was Jesus. And to me, that is the hope that we find in the message. If we didn't have that, that would be a terribly distraughtful story that it would be a hard lesson. And so, I basically end by saying people who are Christian do live happily ever after, which sounds like some sort of, verbiage that is oversimplification. But the fact of the matter is, we who might live a tough life on earth, we can safely say, in the arms of Jesus, in the days to come, we will live happily ever after in the realm of the kingdom.
I, I, yeah, and I think some of that, well, that's one of the reasons why we have hope. I mean, people that have been oppressed or enslaved or whatever it might be, they had this hope of a life after this one, and that's what kept them going in this life.
Right.
And that I think is a really powerful message to pull together. You know,
Well, and it's so necessary. Now, people who live lives of affluence might not put a whole lot of impact on their immortality because they're living a pretty good life now. But you take someone who's faced in persecution, say in China or wherever, and their whole life is filled with persecution and suffering. The hope of the resurrection, the hope of an afterlife with Jesus is the only thing that they cling to hang on to this life. I mean, just to get through this life.
well, that also leads people to become willing martyrs. Like, I'm willing to die because I know this isn't the end.
Right,
So I don't have that fear.
right,
So I can do what I have to do, even if that means I'm going to die in the process,
correct.
and be
Yeah.
and be okay with that.
Yeah, I
I
think it does give you added strength knowing that, yeah, this isn't the final say, that life isn't the final say, that God has the final say in the matter.
Right. Okay. And that is really what I wanted to get into. I will say that you did have the poem in there, the touch of
Yeah,
the master's hand also.
yeah,
Definitely, if you did not hear that, I'm going to link the message down in the description so you can go there and listen to the whole thing. There's a lot of good stuff in there. Definitely worth a listen. And after you listen to that, come back here and listen to what we talked about again and see how all that relates. And we'll see you next week.
very good. Be blessed.